In my last video on coming up with game ideas, I said one of the best ways to come up with ideas is to just write them down whenever they come to you, and pretty soon you'll have a huge stockpile of ideas stored in your back pocket that you can use whenever you like. I've been keeping a list of game ideas for years now, and I've amassed a ton of game ideas that I've just been sitting on. So these are the top 50 game ideas I would make if I had the time. Kicking off this list, I have this dive kick platformer game I never got around to finishing. The idea originated from this dive kick fighting game and also this fencing game Nidhogg, which I thought would make a pretty good mechanic for a platformer. I wanted the game to be about building up lots of speed and keeping your momentum, so I added a slide mechanic too. This game actually started from a much older project where I made the player an armadillo, since they can curl into a ball and roll around. Unfortunately though, the project's a little lost to time, so this is the best prototype I have at the moment. I never got around to finishing it, but it feels pretty fun to run around, and I think it's got some potential. One of the best incremental games I've played is called Digcium. The main game loop has you clicking around to dig up artifacts which you use to bring money to your museum, and in turn buy upgrades to speed up your digging. It's a super simple game, but it's executed so well. I think part of the reason it feels so fun to play is because it's designed to be completed only in a couple of hours. It doesn't fall into the pitfall that a lot of other incremental games do, where the next upgrade is exponentially more and more expensive than the last, and pretty soon it can take days or weeks to progress. Instead, Digcium keeps the user engaged the whole time, and there's no waiting around doing nothing. So using this as an inspiration, I think creating a similar incremental game based around a simple game loop could be super engaging. For example, maybe the player is shooting targets, something similar to Aim Lab or Duck Hunt, and this earns you money which you can use to buy upgrades like more powerful bullets or different spray patterns like a shotgun blast or full automatic weapon. Another possibility is to build a core mechanic around a click speed test, similar to this random Roblox arm wrestling game I found, where you face different opponents and get upgrades to become stronger and stronger. Maybe you could even change the theme, so instead of arm wrestling, you're drag racing cars or chopping trees or something. It may even be cool to turn it into a typing speed test instead. One popular Flash game I remember playing as a kid is Red Remover. It's a physics-based puzzle game where you have to figure out how to remove the red shapes from the screen, but you have to keep all the green shapes on screen, and with the blue ones it doesn't matter. The overall game is pretty simple, but I think there's tons of room for improvement, like maybe adding different physics objects like ropes, springs, and bounce pads, or even getting crazy with it and playing with the gravity, making wind boxes, or messing around with liquids. The graphics could also use a bit of an overhaul too. One of my favorite multiplayer couch games is Rounds. It's a pretty standard platformer shooter game, but where it really shines is its power-up system. Whoever loses the point gets a new power-up, while the winner gets nothing, making for a wonderfully designed, self-balancing system. Plus, like any good roguelike, there's tons of crazy synergies and overpowered builds. However, the standard game only supports 2 players and limits the game to 5 points. The only way to get more players and power-ups is through the use of mods. But even so, the game's still super fun, and I think it'd be interesting to reimagine the game in a different form factor, such as a top-down twin-stick shooter. It could be stylized in a lot of different ways, such as a tank game, and have lots of potential for cool bouncing bullet builds. Another possibility is to lean into a physics-based game instead. Similar to the game Bonk.io, where players try and push each other off of the map, you could remove the health system entirely and use your body and gun to push off opponents from the map. New power-ups could increase a player's mass, or make them faster and more nimble, or guns could have new abilities like shooting physics objects or creating walls. Another idea for a physics-based game is a single-player puzzle platformer. The player would be an archer who shoots arrows that stick into walls. Then you can use the arrows as platforms to reach higher places. You'd have a limited number of arrows you can use throughout the level, and later levels can play around with different arrow types, such as arrows that bounce off walls, or arrows that home onto certain targets, or arrows that can be recalled to the player instead of needing to pick them up. I think I came up with this next one while taking my driver's ed course. There's a lot of texting and driving simulators out there made to encourage people not to text and drive, but none of them are really all that fun. My idea would be to combine a typing game with a simple car dodging game. So on one side of the screen, you're basically playing monkey type, while on the other side, you're dodging cars using the arrow keys or mouse. I still think it'd be nice to keep the overall message against texting and driving, so maybe the typing text is something along those lines. One of my favorite genres of games are Metroidvanias. The name comes from the Metroid and Castlevania franchises, and it's characterized by 2 main features: exploration and upgrades that unlock new areas. For example, in the game Hollow Knight, you can't reach certain areas until you first found the double jump or wall jump abilities, so you'll have to come back and revisit them again later. But I've never seen a Metroidvania where you start out not being able to jump at all. Maybe one exception is the game Tokitori, but in that game you don't even have the ability to jump. I'm talking about a game where you unlock jumping as one of the main upgrades. Similar to the Flash game Johnny Upgrade, where your character lacks extremely basic skills like jumping or even moving left and right. Another cool idea would be a 1-bit black and white Metroidvania where you slowly unlock different colors. For example, unlocking the color blue might turn an otherwise solid platform into water that the player can dive into and explore a whole new area. Or maybe the colors give the player new information about the environment, like revealing certain walls that are destructible or even hiding secret messages. By the end of the game, the world looks completely different and is now full of all kinds of different colors. One of my favorite games I made is this space shooter called Astrofleet, where you can get multiple ships by collecting power-ups. It's kind of similar to the mechanic in Galaga, where you can get a second ship by sacrificing one of your own lives. However, I always wanted to turn this idea into a more elaborate mechanic. Currently, you just shoot the power-ups to get them, but instead the player could collect scrap metal from other ships, and then this fills up a meter for another ship to be built. Building off of this, maybe deciding not to fire activates a magnet which helps collect scrap metal. That way, the player has to constantly choose between shooting and destroying ships, or not shooting and collecting scrap. I think this game could also benefit from some kind of wave system where there's challenging stages or even crazy boss fights. One of the most beautiful looking pixel art games I've ever played is Kingdom. You play as a king or queen collecting coins and spending them on various things like soldiers, weapons, and defenses against creatures that come and attack you at night and try and steal your crown. It's beautifully simple too. You can basically only move left and right and drop coins. My only gripe with it is that a single run can last many hours, making it a little difficult to just pick up and play on a whim. So I think it'd be fun to reimagine the game as a more fast-paced roguelike where you can beat the game in under an hour. To add replayability to the game, it could randomize what kinds of resources and upgrades the player has access to, forcing the player to change their strategy and adapt to what's given to them. It may also be interesting to reimagine the game in a top-down style similar to something like Zombs.io, where you place various towers on the ground to fight off waves of monsters. One of my favorite types of games to play with friends is horror games. We'll usually play random cheap ones we find on Steam, but some favorites include Escape the Backrooms and SCP Secret Laboratory. A common trope in both of these games are enemies that have to do with sight. Like you'll have enemies that attack you if you look at them, or enemies that you can't look away from or they'll kill you. But it's a lot rare to see horror games where sound plays a large role in the enemy design. There is one enemy in SCP that can only see based on sounds, and you can trick players using proximity chat. But I want to see a game entirely designed around sound-based enemies. There is one notable example from a game called In Silence, which has you running from a superhero monster, similar to the ones in the movie A Quiet Place. To escape, you need to stay quiet and collect different car parts scattered around the map, but when playing the game, it just feels kind of tedious because the best strategy is to just stay quiet the whole time and creep around the whole map. So instead, it'd be super cool to see a game where multiple types of sound-based enemies require you to switch up your playing style. So maybe there's one enemy that can hear you really well, so you have to stay quiet, but there's also an enemy you have to scare away by being really loud, similar to the wolves in Rust, which you can scare off by shouting into your voice chat. And it'd also be awesome to see puzzles that require multiple players to talk to each other in order to solve. Plus, imagine how terrifying it'd be to try and hide from a monster while your friends won't shut up on the radio. Going back to the SCP lore, there's one story about an infinite IKEA store that actually inspired the development of a surprisingly fun Roblox game. You wander around through the store collecting resources, and at night, you have to hide from these employee monsters. Plus, you can even build up some defenses using the furniture you find in the store. It's a really cool idea, and I think another version you could do is an infinite parking lot. You can find different resources by breaking into cars, and even hotwire them to get them running. But at night, there are scavengers that the player needs to avoid. There's a lot of directions you could go in terms of different structures to add. Like maybe there's a small farming community somewhere that dug up the asphalt and started growing crops, or weird things people are doing with their shopping carts, or even some special structure that you can use to eventually escape. Another horror game idea I had was inspired by the show Over the Garden Wall. Without giving away any spoilers, there's one character called the Woodsman who is strangely obsessed with keeping his lantern lit and must cut down a special kind of tree in the forest and turn them into oil at his mill. The forest, though, is inhabited by a mysterious creature known as the Beast, and I think it'd be really cool to see a game built around this concept. If you've seen the show, maybe you can lean further into its lore, and even if you haven't seen it, you could come up with your own creative twists. A more lighthearted game about gathering resources is this charming little unfinished project of mine. It's loosely based around the progression system of Muck, but reimagined to be a top-down 2D game. There's multiple different ore types of increasing rarity starting with stone, then copper, then iron, and finally gold, as well as different wood types of increasing rarity starting with oak, then birch, then pine, and finally dark oak. You could easily add more and more ores and wood types beyond the ones I made though. I also added some nice little inventory, crafting, and smelting systems, but never got around to finishing the full game. I intended on adding different kinds of enemies and weapons to the game, similar to the top-down shooter game Nuclear Throne, as well as other kinds of roguelike elements like power-ups and perks. Another direction I saw this game going was turning into a social deduction game. Oftentimes the tasks the good players need to do are pretty menial and tedious, so why not slap the social deduction element on top of an already fun to play survival game? There could be certain corrupt ores or trees that grant players special powers but are only accessible to the evil players. Good players must keep careful watch over these corrupt resources and make sure no one takes them, while the evil players must use them to gain an upper hand over the rest of the players. While on the topic of social deduction games, one thing I've never seen done before is a 2-player social deduction game. And it sounds like this would never work because if I'm the good player, then obviously the other person is the evil one, but instead each player could choose what to do. Not sure if this would be any fun at all, but I think it'd be cool to explore. Essentially, there'd be 4 cases. Either both players cooperate together, each earning some points, or player 1 cheats against player 2, stealing some of their points, or the opposite, player 2 cheats against player 1, or both players try to cheat each other and no one gets anything. This pattern is a game theory concept known as the prisoner's dilemma, and there's a really cool interactive guide on it called The Evolution of Trust. In it, you play many iterations of this very simple game with one choice, either cooperate or cheat. Then it explores some of the game theory behind repeated plays of this simple game and what sorts of strategies are the best, which is why I think it'd be a really cool idea to wrap this idea in a longer form game between 2 players. Maybe you each play as the ruler of neighboring kingdoms and must each pick a response to different randomized events. Say a group of invaders is approaching. Should you send out your troops to fight them off? If you both send them out, you'll fight them off with minimal losses. But if only one person sends them out, they'll defeat the invaders but lose most of their troops. But if neither person sends troops, then the invaders will ransack each kingdom. And more importantly, how will your choice affect decisions later down the line, and how will your choice affect the trust between you and the other player? If you'd rather not test the trust of your friends, maybe you could pick up this GIF captioning game that I never got the chance to finish. My idea was to do something similar to the Quiplash game from Jackbox, but instead of writing a joke, you pick GIFs to match the prompt. This one probably best be developed as a web app. I started working on it using Firebase as the backend and the Tenor API for picking GIFs, but I didn't really get too far developing it. If you think the idea has potential, you could also quickly playtest it by getting a group of friends, some Quiplash prompts, and hopping in a Discord call using the built-in GIF keyboard to submit answers. One of the most famous games on the Cool Math Games website is the world's hardest game, which is actually just a pretty simple dodge and avoid top-down game. And while yes, the game is really simple, I think that's part of the beauty in it. It's really well executed, and if you want to make your own version, you could just go absolutely crazy with the effects and make it really juicy to play. I'm picturing graphics similar to the Geometry Wars series and pairing it with a killer soundtrack. And if you want to learn more about game juice, check out this awesome video by Game Maker's Toolkit all about it. I have a lot of hours in FTL, and not so many wins, but I still love to play it every now and then. It's a roguelike real-time strategy game where you manage a spaceship and try and save the galaxy from the evil rebel fleet. And I love this game. You can pick up new crew members, weapons, and upgrade your ship to fight the final boss. My only criticism is that I've played it so many times that the final boss is actually no longer as surprising as the very first time I fought it. And there are a ton of great mods out there that add plenty of new content to the game, and I've even played around with some, mostly the multiverse mod. But I'd still love to see a remake of the game with an emphasis on boss fights, which are usually the most exciting and interesting parts of the game. Like how in Slay the Spire, every floor has a randomly picked boss that has its own unique gimmick or strategy to beat it. And also, I'd love to see a feature that lets me continue after the final boss fight. I want to fight until my ship explodes into a million pieces. With remaking any game though, it'd be best not to stick too closely to the original and make your own creative decisions. Like instead of focusing on the micromanaging crew members and the hand-to-hand combat aspect, maybe put more focus into the ship-to-ship combat and different weapon types, shields, and synergies. Or maybe go the other way around and focus strictly on boarding ships with real-time combat between different troop types. Another game genre where this micromanaging is at the front and center is in colony sim games like RimWorld. I've had lots of fun playing RimWorld, but oh my god, is the learning curve super high for someone just getting started. But I do have to say, once you do get started, I was pretty hooked and even got interested in some other colony sim games like Dwarf Fortress. But then a stupid fire-breathing beetle lit the whole map on fire, killing all my dwarves along with my frame rate. So I haven't actually played it in a while, much since then. But I still think it's a really cool game though. But I strive for a colony sim game that's stripped down to the bare bones. I want all my little pawns to be exactly the same, and there's only like one resource or two to gather. I think the game I'm dreaming of is kind of similar to this game called Little Guys, but it's not out yet on Steam. I do have it wishlisted though, and I'm looking really forward to playing it. But until then, if you want to take a stab at making your own colony sim game, I had an idea to make an ant-themed one where you're just controlling these little ants in a little ant farm, and you have to gather resources like food and water to sustain the colony, all while fighting off other insect enemies and protecting the queen. Again, I think the emphasis should be on a dead simple system so an absolute beginner could get an easy grasp on it. I think ants should be mostly autonomous and will work fine on their own, but you have the ability to make high-level decisions like where tunnels and rooms should go and sending ants to go fight off enemies. This next one's maybe a little less gamey and more kind of an interactive educational thing, but a while ago I became fascinated with different maze-making algorithms and which ones are most difficult for a human to solve. There's tons of different algorithms out there such as randomized depth-first search, Prim's algorithm, Driscoll's algorithm, and so on. But there's even other stuff you can do, like if you start building a randomized depth-first search from the start, it's actually pretty easy to solve because it kind of leads you to the end. But if you start the algorithm at the finish instead, and then try solving it from the start, you run into all these dead ends, which makes it really difficult to solve. But then what if someone tries to solve it backwards instead? So maybe the algorithm needs to start somewhere in the middle and branch out both ways. There's a ton of different ways you could approach the problem. So I'm picturing an interactive website with a bunch of different maze-making algorithms, and it times different players based on how long it takes them to solve the maze, and creates a leaderboard for the best algorithms. Another option would even be to include a little code playground that lets users design their own maze-making algorithms and then throw those into the leaderboard. This next idea comes from a horror game that uses a LiDAR scanner to see the environment and avoid enemies. I've seen this in a few different types of games, and I actually have a lot of experience working with LiDAR on robots, starting with your most basic 1D LiDAR sensor that just looks out straight ahead, and then your 2D LiDAR sensor, which spins in a circle and can make a 2D map, and then a 3D LiDAR sensor, which spins in 2 axes so you can see the environment in 3D. I think it'd be really cool to see a game that combines these different kinds of LiDAR sensors into a single Metroidvania horror game. So the player starts out with a super basic LiDAR that's almost like a laser pointer, and then later they get more and more advanced LiDAR sensors that they'll need to survive increasingly difficult monsters. There's this incremental game called Idle Breakout where you can earn money by breaking bricks, which you can then use to buy more balls and different upgrades. Instead, we could flip this idea on its head, and instead of controlling the balls, you can purchase different kinds of bricks. Maybe some allow you to pick them up and move them around the map, letting you set up super satisfying patterns that can get tons of money quickly. Balatro absolutely changed the roguelike scene, and it's based on such a simple tabletop game, poker, which gave me the idea to make a similar roguelike game based on my favorite tabletop game, chess. My idea was to make something similar to the game Into the Breach, which is a turn-based roguelike strategy game, but I also wanted to incorporate some deck building aspects for placing different pieces on the board based on their value. I also had ideas to make different types of special pieces, like steel pieces that could move twice in one turn, or glass pieces that only had a certain number of moves, or gold pieces that earn money when they moved, or bomb pieces that could detonate when captured, destroying nearby pieces. Eventually, I abandoned the idea because I got busy with other things, but I've actually seen some other chess roguelikes pop up on YouTube that seem to follow the same idea. It's hard to find a better example than Super Hexagon of how a really simple idea can become a stunning final product based on the style and music alone. All you do in the game is move a cursor to dodge incoming shapes. That's it. But it's the visuals and music that turn this simple idea into something truly addictive. Using this concept, I think a car dodging game about weaving in between traffic could make for a great starting point. The game itself is extremely simple, just move left and right, but when polished up with some great visuals and music, it could make for a really captivating game. This one's another Flash era classic, Age of War. It's a strategy game where you send troops to defend your base and attack the enemy, and you can purchase new advanced units, tools, and powers to gain an upper hand against your opponent. There's also a similar game called Battle Cats, which follows the same concept, but you could easily retheme the game as whatever you want. Additionally, it'd be great to see new mechanics. I especially like the idea of adding an option to invest in your economy. This adds for a great decision-making element for the player. Should I invest money into my economy to hopefully gain an upper hand later, but will make me more vulnerable to enemy attacks now? Also, certain units can be ranged, or super slow and tanky, or deal splash damage. You could even get crazy with different troop weaknesses or synergies. There's so many options. You could also take these ideas and translate them into your own real-time strategy war game. I have super fond memories of playing Age of Empires 2 way back in the day, but you could easily create your own game with unique troops and mechanics. I think some of the art assets from Kenny would be great for this purpose, since they're free to use under the Creative Commons license. But you could also find other art online or drop your own and retheme it however you want. This next idea was created by me and my friends while playing the game Golf with Your Friends. It's a pretty standard golf game, but it comes with a lot of customization options, so you can shoot all at once and knock each other's balls around, which is pretty fun. But we got this idea when messing around with some of the game settings. It lets you tweak things like how many strokes you get per hole and the time limit for each hole. And we found it super fun to set the time limit super low, like maybe 10 or 20 seconds, and then have an infinite number of strokes. But if you don't make it in, we made the penalty like 100. So you're not really worried about how many shots it takes, just that you make it to the hole in time. And this was so much fun. It encouraged risky shots and hitting people other and sending them flying, or even camping out the hole and trying to keep other people from getting in right before the timer runs out. I feel like a well-polished game built around this concept would be super fun to play with friends. And it wouldn't even need to be 3D. I think a 2D top-down or isometric game would work great as well. If I'm bored on a long car ride or just waiting around, I'll sometimes whip out Super Auto Pets on my phone. It's a great little deck-building roguelike game focused around making powerful synergies to wipe out the enemy team. For example, the horse gives extra attack to any friend summoned. So combine that with the cricket, spider, or sheep, which all summon friends when they faint, and you've got a pretty powerful combo. Or take the kangaroo, which gets buffed whenever the friend ahead of it attacks, and place it behind the camel, which gives a buff to the nearest friend behind it whenever it takes damage, and you've got another crazy powerful combo. My idea for improving further upon the game would be to let players see the opposing team before the battle starts. Normally, you kind of just need to hope whatever you buy makes you strong enough to survive the next round, but I think it'd be much more strategic to plan out your turn based on what the opponent has. This obviously won't work in a multiplayer setting, but the game really isn't multiplayer. You have no interaction with the other player besides being randomly paired against them. It'd virtually be the same if the other team was randomly picked by some kind of bot. And this would add so much in terms of strategy and depth to the game. Plus, not to mention, I could finally play it on the plane without Wi-Fi. I'm always looking for platformers with interesting or dynamic movement mechanics. One such mechanic that's always fascinated me is the infamous rocket jump, made popular by games like Team Fortress 2. It's smooth and fluid, plus serves double duty as an attack method. It makes me wonder what the result would be if we took this mechanic and used it in a single-player platforming game. I'm also interested to see how this mechanic would translate to a 2D platformer. Another cool idea for a platformer is removing the ability to move left or right entirely and just have the players automatically run forward. And I'm not talking about an endless runner where there's no turning at all. I'm talking about something similar to this mobile game called King of Thieves. There's only one button, jump. But you can change direction by jumping off of a wall. I want to take this mechanic and bring it into a game where you're scaling up a tower and escaping rising lava. It could even have roguelike elements with upgrades and power-ups. If you really want to make a lot of games quickly, it helps to have a good reason to make a bunch of smaller scale games. I recently started making a minigame party game similar to something like Mario Party or WarioWare. It was originally started just as a fun thing to make and play with my roommates, but now I'm actually starting to realize it might have some potential as a full game soon, so stay tuned for later updates. And also excuse the rough graphics, most of the games are really early in the prototyping phase. But not only is it fun to play, but it makes for a great excuse to make smaller games that only take a minute or two to play. It's a lot harder to create something that's captivating enough for an hour of gameplay, let alone 15 minutes. But creating 15 games that you can play in a minute? Not so hard. So it's opened the door for me to create lots of interesting games that I otherwise never would have made. Probably my favorite one of these games so far is this tag platformer I made. One player is designated it, and they have to tag someone else before the time runs out. Whoever's it when the time runs out is eliminated, and a new random player is selected until only one winner is left. I made the chaser just slightly faster than the other players too, so you'll need to fake them out with some jukes in order to dodge them. Another minigame I made is this competitive version of Plinko. Multiple players all place balls on the same board and compete to have the most money when the timer runs out, or when all players run out of balls, whatever comes first. But usually that doesn't happen because there's also buckets that give you extra balls or even double your balls. So with careful planning, you can stockpile a ton of balls and amass a huge amount of money to win. Additionally, I made this mind guessing minigame. Players need to keep track of the mines as they're shuffled around and then take turns picking until there's only one player left. It's kind of like the game of musical chairs. And it's not the most captivating game ever. I actually got the idea from this Deal or No Deal arcade machine, but in the context of a larger party game, it works great. Another minigame I'm thinking of making is a color match game, similar to those TikTok videos where you see people sorting those water bottles, or those Minecraft ones where they're trying to match the blocks. The idea for the game, though, I believe originates from this board game called Mastermind. So in the background, the computer decides upon a random sequence, and the players take turns guessing the secret pattern, and the computer will tell them how many they got right. Okay, last minigame idea, I swear. Another idea is from this arm wrestling game from the Outlast trials, which I've never played, but it looks super fun and is kind of similar to that Pop the Lock arcade game. Except in this version, it's a 1v1 game where players struggle to outmuscle each other and win. However, the game could easily be reskinned to fit whatever theme you like. Now, with all these minigames I've talked about, another twist you can put on them is a social deduction element. In this Wii U party game, there's a game mode called Spot the Sneak, where one player's remote will vibrate randomly, signaling them that they have access to special abilities that let them cheat at the game. But at the end of the game, players will vote on who they think is the cheater and will let them steal points from the cheater. It's an interesting twist that you can add on top of a ton of existing games. This next idea doesn't come from me, but from the fantastic game studio Vlambeer, who made hits like Super Crate Box and Nuclear Throne. It's called Flood, and they say it's a prototype that never quite made it over the finish line. The idea was to make improvements to the tower defense genre, which can often be a bit slow. So in Flood, it's a lot less careful planning and more throwing down turrets and blazing through hordes of enemies. The other problem with tower defense games is that they can punish you for making tiny mistakes spread over a long period of time. So when you lose a tower in Flood, you get its full cost back in scrap. Scrap slowly converts back into cash, so no matter how big you lose, you can always recuperate your losses. Flambeer says they never quite finished the game because it was always in a state of change and ideas kept evolving, plus there was a bit of a learning curve for new players. But the prototype's still really fun, and you can try it out for free on itch.io. A lot of 2D platformers share pretty similar mechanics, so it can be difficult to create something memorable and unique. What can maybe help though is wrapping the game up in some kind of story or theme, like being shrunk down to the size of an ant, like in games like Grounded, where you're stuck in the backyard, or in It Takes Two, where you go all over the house. This can help to contextualize some of the things in the world, like why are there bounce pads or springs everywhere? But something like a bouncy mushroom makes a little more sense. Plus, think of all the other game mechanics you can come up with by just drawing inspiration from real life. And your players will already have a pretty good idea of how to interact with these objects based on their intuition alone. Joust is an old action arcade game from 1982 where you fly around defeating enemies riding buzzards. It was a very successful game at the time, but surprisingly, not much has really stemmed from it. I'd love to see a modern remake of the game with some updated graphics and maybe some new mechanics and game modes. I think it'd even make for a great couch multiplayer game to just play with some friends. Another game that could use a modern remake is Insaniquarium. In the game, you manage a tank of fish that drop coins, which you can use to buy food and other upgrades. Pretty soon, you'll be juggling collecting all the coins, keeping all your fish fed, and fighting off attackers that periodically spawn. I actually haven't played the game, but I've played this similar Plants vs. Zombies minigame where you're feeding zombies brains instead. It's basically the same thing, but it goes to show that you can style the game however you want, and the core concept still works. I think the main game loop is pretty engaging though, and there's lots of satisfaction that comes with exponentially increasing your fish and money output. Additionally, there's quick time decision making that leaves room for interesting choices. For example, in Insaniquarium, later down the line you can choose to buy carnivores, which will eat some of the smaller guppies, but drop a lot more money. Mini Metro is a strategy game where you have to design a subway map for an ever-growing city. It's got a great minimalistic art style and is super relaxing to play. But what if we added a little extra chaos into the mix by introducing some unpredictable obstacles, like cats? Oftentimes, I found Mini Metro a little too slow-paced, so what if players need to juggle things like picking up trains that get knocked down, or quickly diverting them elsewhere? Maybe you could even pick up trains and drop them somewhere totally different to shave a little extra time off their route, something you can't normally do in Mini Metro. There could even be mechanics like buying cat treats or toys to distract the cats and keep them away from your trains. Or maybe instead you want the cats to play with the trains, and this gives you more money to purchase new train cars or tracks. These videos are from a railroad ramen restaurant in Japan that was originally struggling, but one day a cat wandered into the restaurant and started playing with the trains, which became an absolute hit with the customers and essentially saved the restaurant. They totally pivoted their business model, and now they're part railroad restaurant and part cat shelter. Prop Hunt can be traced back to a Garry's Mod game mode where players disguise themselves as different props and hide from hunters. But how could this work in a local multiplayer setting? Well, there's one game called Boomerang Fu which has a special hide-and-seek game mode that achieves this, but I think there's plenty of room for improvements. The game works by having the seeker close their eyes while everyone else hides, but this doesn't leave much room for hiders to change up their hiding spot because once the seeker opens their eyes, they can just plainly see if someone starts moving around. But some of the best prop hunt moments are when you almost get caught and manage to slip away back into hiding. So I think adding elements that allow for this could be really fun. In certain maps, the lights could go out randomly, or players could throw something down like a smoke grenade. Or maybe players can disguise themselves as certain NPCs or mobs that normally move around and wander to different places. An alternative might be to just make one hider against a team of seekers. There's a game on the Wii U where players work together to find an invisible ghost using flashlights and their remotes which rumble if the ghost is nearby. But this only really works because the invisible player can see themselves on the gamepad screen. So instead, they could hide in a sea of NPCs, like in Hidden in Plain Sight. No one knows who you are because everyone looks more or less the same, but you can figure out who you are based on which one matches your movement. So in this game mode, the seekers could try and find the hider using their flashlights while the hider tries to evade them and blend in. Papers, Please is a point-and-click game where you take the role of an immigration officer for the fictional country Arstotzka. The player must review passports and paperwork against an ever-growing list of rules. The gameplay is pretty simple, but the story and different endings is what really makes the game special. Recently, I started watching the World War II series Band of Brothers, and there's this scene where they launch an attack on a German artillery battery, and it got me thinking about all the math that goes into accurately hitting a target. And it gave me the idea to create a similar point-and-click game where you follow a set of pretty rudimentary rules. You're given a target to hit on a map, so you have to measure the distance and look up the corresponding angle to set on a lookup table. And then finally, you have to launch your shell. And similar to Papers, Please, the basic game loop is simple, but there's a lot of room for great, immersive storytelling that could either be based on fictional or historical events. Crawl is a local multiplayer dungeon crawler, but while one player controls the hero, the other players take control of different monsters and traps. Whichever player deals the killing blow to the hero then takes over and they have to run through the dungeon. The winner of the game is whoever defeats the final boss. This game's a lot of fun to play with friends, and I'd love to take this mechanic and translate it into a side-scrolling platform game. Kind of like how in the co-op mode of Spelunky, when you become a ghost that can interact with the world. And you're supposed to be helping the remaining living players by triggering traps or freezing enemies, but I usually end up killing them anyways by accident. And finally, one last idea. I got this idea while playing Catan with some of my friends, which we almost always play when we get together, usually on my friend's super cool custom 3D printed board. But anyways, love playing Catan, but hate waiting for people to play their turn. So, what if instead everyone made their turn all at once? There's similar instances where turn-based games have been turned into real-time games, like in Kung Fu Chess, where there are no longer turns, but each piece has a cooldown timer before it can move again. Someone even took this idea and built it into a real board. But my idea for real-time Catan is to put the dice on a set timer, say every 30 seconds or so. Then everyone makes their turn all together, and whoever places their settlement or road first gets the spot. You can also trade with anyone at any time, similar to the board game Pit, where players are shouting at each other like stockbrokers. So probably not the most beginner-friendly game, but should be a whole lot of fun for seasoned players as well as total chaos. There's still some kinks that need to be worked out though, like how should the robber work? Does it just go somewhere random when a 7 gets rolled? Or does the person in last get to place it? Or whoever reacts first get to place it? And what about the initial placement of settlements and roads? Should it work like normal with the snake draft? Or should it be a mad dash to place in the best spot? I'm not sure what will end up being the most fun, but I'll leave it to you to playtest and figure out what works best. You could even break out a Catan board and timer to playtest it in real life too. And with that does it. 50 game ideas I would make if I had the time. I hope this video gave you some inspiration for different games to make, and if it did, don't forget to click the like button to help others find it, and feel free to subscribe so you can stay up to date with any new videos. And if you want to see more on game design, check out these videos here. Thank you so much for watching.